Now, the COVID-19 obviously has struck us all, both in the private sphere and also in the business sphere. And we're hearing from a lot of companies how it's affecting them, that being supply chain problems, financial problems, or problems working across borders. And for that reason, we thought it would be interesting to revisit these problems in the context of the Big Science facilities. And that's the purpose for this meeting, to bring together ILOs and facilities and see what we can work out. I'll be moderating the session from here and trying keep a control of the clock as the 2 hours here progress. We will try and keep it sharply on the 2 hours. And we will have a bunch of different speakers. And I'm very excited to welcome Paolo as the first one. Paolo is the president of PERIIA, and he will give an introduction to the event. Please go ahead, Paolo.
Thank you, Nikolai. Thank you very much. I just start to share my video for the moment. Okay, it's fine. Everybody can see it. Perfect, perfect. So yep. First of all, welcome to the third webinar of ERIITC knowledge series. Just some technical aspect. Please use the chat box for type your question, and after each presentation, the question will be addressed in question and answer sessions. But wait, sorry. Wait, sorry, just one moment, because it doesn't work for going on. Wait. Okay.
I can run it if you want, and then just let me know when.
Yes. You can do that?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. Or I can show you. Okay, do that. Thank you very much.
Can you see it?
Yes, it looks.
Which?
Okay.
You see the right slide?
Yes, yes,
okay.
Yes. If you can do in the next one, please. Thank you very much. So, welcome to the industrial impact in big science market after one year of COVID pandemic. That is something that the PERIIA network, as you know, is the Pan-European Research Infrastructure ILO Association, is thinking that it was important, right, just to discuss, to see what's happened in this last year and during this period that was really hard for everybody, and to understand which kind of steps we can do that. So you can see here the members of PERIIA board. That is, as you can see, we are 7 persons from 7 different countries, from working for 4 different big science organizations. And the idea is to have this connection with this association with all the ILOs in Europe in the big science market. I want to take this opportunity to thank all the board members that were really worked on this kind of topic, and you will see them just step by step afterwards during our presentation. So if you can go to the next one.
Sorry.
Yes, but we ask to different speakers from different big science organizations to give us their contribution. The contribution just to show us which are the provisions that has taken for this kind of question, and which are also the proposal for the future. So let me also thank the representative of Big Science Organization, and then it will be introduced step by step by Nikolai afterwards. Please. So still some technical aspect. So that that this session has been recorded. That during the presentation, please disable your camera, and of course mute your microphone. Just in order to be ready to everybody can hear each other. Please, next one. So that is Eric. I will just leave some words from Nikolai for the project, please.
Yep, great, thank you. And I'm heavily involved in ENRIITC, working on the strategy work package. ENRIITC embraces all of the European research infrastructure, so not only the big science facilities. And basically, it's a fairly small EU project that tries to pave the path to see how should research infrastructures work together with industry. And two particularly interesting roles there are the industrial liaisons officers and industrial contact officers working together with national industry or working inside the facility to facilitate the contact with industry. But it does embrace both industry as a supplier or a user, or in the innovation sphere where it's as a co-creator or working with technology transfer. ENRIITC succeeded in bringing together quite a lot of stakeholders. We have a huge number of associate partners to the project, and we use that as a way to really work as a platform for these events. And this current Enrich Your Knowledge is a series that we made to listen to what are the topics that people want to be addressed, and then setting up a meeting site for discussing these things. Finally, organizationally, ENRIITC is led by the European Spallation Source, and we have 5 research infrastructures and 5 organizations where you have ILO sitting. So I think that's all for ENRIITC for now.
Thank you, Nikolai. If you want to change the slide. Thank you. So what we have to think to do. After my short presentation, introduction on this kind of webinar, that just to explain you which is the purpose. So mainly is just to understand what's happened, but also what we can do in the future, which kind of proposal we can take, and to have a real exchange of opinions among ILOs from different kind of big science organization. We were thinking to use different kind of tools just to go in deep in this way. That is something like a real working group that is working together just to understand what's happening and what we can do together. So after me, there will be the presentation by Belen that is about our analysis, the PERIIA analysis that you have received as ILOs. You have received our questionnaire, so a survey, just where some questions just to see the perception that everybody has taken during this period, which are the problems and which are the possible next step. And Belen will present the outcomes of this questionnaire. Afterwards, we will have this kind of the contribution of a big science organization that are really important for us, of course, they are really precious. And so there will be the different kind of presentation of big science organization, and Nikolai will moderate them. That we will use the Mentimeter experience. Thanks to Anna coordination, we will just suggest some proposals, some questions to your evaluation, and just to see which kind of perception, which kind of idea you have about the possible proposal, possible suggestion that we can present to big science organization, to European Commission, to European institution, or whatever other stakeholders that we can involve. At the end, there will be our ILO's proposal that comes from this kind of process about what as ILOs, as PERIIA and the Association of ILOs can suggest in order to relaunch the participation industry and the economy in big science market. So this kind of discussion, and then also the next steps that we can take, will be coordinated, this kind of discussion by Tom. These are our idea to have a webinar that is possible to arrive to some conclusions or some proposals, to be honest. But then it's really important for our point of view, the contribution from all ILOs involved in this webinar, all ILOs that we have contacted even before. And then it will be interesting, I think, also for big science organizations and other international stakeholders to know which are the proposals from PERIIA. Please, next. So If you have any question, everything that you can write to info.peria.eu or to check to our website, peria.eu. Just to remember, PERIA, the Pan-European Research Infrastructure ILO Association, has been established in 2018 during the first Big Science Business Forum in Copenhagen. Then we have two General Assembly, and we are already planning the third General Assembly in Granada during the next Big Science Business Forum that everybody knows why we are doing that the next year and not this year. So if you are interested, if some ILOs are not already registered to the PERIA network, please write to info.peria.eu, write to me, or write to Tom, that is the responsible for membership for PERIA. Just to end, the announcement in the next webinar, as you can see, it will be the 21st of June, of course, promoted and coordinated by Eric Project. And then I think that it could be really a good occasion to have another kind of this discussion. I will just stop my presentation. I think next one, I think that is finished. Yeah, okay. And it's a pleasure just to give the floor to Belen, that she will present to us the outcomes of the ILOS questionnaire, the questionnaire that we sent to all ILOS, and I think that it could be really interesting about the results. Thank you.
Okay.
Just before we pass over to Anne-Belen, I think we're the maximum amount of participants now, so probably a good time to take a picture. Anna, do you want to lead?
I would love to. So if you take your camera from the 47 participants, so we have 2 slides. So you don't know when I will take your picture, so you have to smile for a while. And who was it? Today you're beautiful. That was Leonardo's comment, right? And you didn't have to pay for me telling you. So everyone do you have a camera? We're still missing some cameras. Is it okay to put it on? Here we go. Great. Okay. So big smile, everyone. Happy for it's Friday. Okay. Friday smile. Okay. First Friday smile. And you don't know which picture you're on. So let's see. Oh, you are so beautiful. Let's go for the next slide here. Okay. And this one is even more beautiful. Big smile. Smile. Nice. Thank you so much. Good job.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Please, Anne-Belen, you go ahead and share the screen.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. After this important moment of the day, I will try to share my screen. Okay. So now you can see my slides. My name is Anne-Belen. I am the Spanish Industrial Liaison Officer for Fusion for Energy and ITER organization. And I am also Vice Deputy Chair of the PERIA board. So now, yeah. As Paolo mentioned, I will try to present you the outcome of the questionnaire. So just as a reminder, the objectives of the questionnaire were to analyze the impact on the industry of the pandemic. Secondly, we want to know how the work of the ILOs has been affected. And finally, which should be the most appropriate, the most interesting measures trying to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. So here you can see the participants on the questionnaire. So we have received 26 answers. Most of them, 81%, were members of PERIA. So as you can see, we have a good representation of about 15 nationalities, most of them from Europe. So here you can see that we have 12 big science facilities represented through their ILOs working for them. And some of them were very well represented. As you can see, F4E, CERN, or ESS, we have received many answers from the ILOs. Let's talk now about the first question that was, after 1 year of pandemic, which is the main impact of COVID pandemic on your national industry? Most of the ILOs think that delays, financial impact, and shortage of supplies are the most negatively affected, but also have been negatively affected the demand, the staff, and the uncertainty situation due to changing rules. So, in the next slide. You see that most of the ILOs, 58%, consider that the national industry has been negatively affected after this 1 year of pandemic. But it is also maybe surprising that 42% consider that their national big science industry has not been affected. How SMEs were affected by the pandemic. So here you can see that even the situation is getting worse in the case of SMEs. 73% of the ILOs think that the situation has been aggravated for SMEs. In this question, how has your work performing the following ILOs tasks has been affected? Most of the ILOs think that the most affected task is in their daily job has been the organization of events, and on second place, the interaction with big science organizations and companies. On the contrary, the less affected ILOs tasks are the dissemination of information and forthcoming opportunities. According to the question. How would your industry value the following measures to mitigate the COVID impact on future opportunities? So most of the ILOs value the following measures as very positive for forthcoming opportunities. So we are referring here to the electronic submission of offers, the remote work, joint e-platforms, and the facilitation of prime or subcontractor or SMEs collaboration. How would your industry value the following measures to mitigate the impact on ongoing contracts? Most of the ILO consider that all these measures could be very positive. We are talking here about contingency plans, extra-sanitary measures, financial support in line with the technical progress, and also partial payments to subcontractors, and a case-by-case discussion about the force majeure clause. So, the next one is, do you consider that SMEs will require the implementation of a special set of measures supporting them? And 81% of the ILOs consider that SMEs will require a special set of measures. I think that this is not something new. It is an all request on ILO side. Here you can see the question about which kind of measures would you suggest to relevant international authorities in order to support SMEs and industry in big science market. So we have received a lot of interesting proposals supporting big science industry with a special focus on SMEs. And we have tried to group them under these three categories: financial issues. Here, this is a very short advance, but a detailed summary will be presented to you by Anna Holt during the Mentimeter session. In the case of financial issues, we have received a lot of proposals related to the next generation plans, dedicated task provisions, employment preservation, and so on. In the category about procurement matters, we have received proposals talking about the simplification of low-value tenders, standardization of tender codes, common set of basic procurement rules. In the case of consolidation of the big science market, we have received proposals related to harmonized purchasing practices or developing a common business market. And in the case of the relationship, the improvement of the relationship, we have received proposals talking about structuring ways for sharing success stories, for instance. But you will receive a detailed information about this during the Mentimeter session. Okay? The next question was about other comment or suggestion if you wish to contribute to this webinar. Here we can see some suggestions related to the common set of basic procurement rules. Another one related to what changed for SMEs after ENRIITC. The third one is related about a mapping of good tools and practices developed during this COVID time. The next one is considering big science market as a strategic sector. And the last one is related to analyze the impact of COVID on big science market compared to other S3 domains. These are your proposals. And the last question is related to which other matters will be interesting for your work. Here, you say that technology transfer and exchange of experience among ILOs would be interesting. PERIIA and ENRIITC objectives, how to make them more result-oriented. Another proposal related to the development between facilities and SMEs. Other proposal related to sharing success stories concerning ILOs initiatives. Why do many software-related tenders need manpower on site? The last one is related about big science industrial competition. So I think that's all. So if you have any question, as I mentioned, we will have time during the Mentimeter session in the final part with the final conclusion to discuss and to show you in detail all these proposals.
Thank you very much, Anne-Belén. And as you said, you're welcome to pose questions, either put them in the chat or raise your hand and we will call you out. Good. Maybe another exercise. Those of you who participated in the survey, could they raise their hands just to get an overview? Yeah, I did mean your digital hand, but anyway. Okay, there was a few participants at least. Great. Okay, let's move on to the next point and now hear from the facilities. And I will just share my screen here. Here you go. So we are extremely happy to welcome four quite distinguished speakers who really know this area, and we're thrilled that they accepted to give their take on it. So for the next four speakers, we will have Mikko Meninga from ESS, Anders Rønnevik from CERN, Frank Germs from ESA, European Space Agency, and Leonardo Biagioni from Fusion for Energy, which is the European part of the ITER project. We'll kick off with Mikko. And Mikko is, oh, sorry for cutting half of your face here. There you go. So Mikko has been working in public administration for more than 24 years, working with both public procurement and contracted in logistics. And well, you can say you're a newcomer to the world of big science, but when we see your resume, Mikko, we see that you've both been at NATO and the United Nations. So it's a really strong competence to join into the ESS offices in 2014. And as it says, since 2018, you've been the head of the division and working very closely with this procurement. So please, Mikko, you can go ahead and share your screen and take over the microphone.
Thanks a lot, Nikolai. Yeah, and as you say, the experience was maybe a bit different. Let me share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, great. First of all, thanks for having me. It's a great opportunity to exchange experience and see you all. It has been far too long, and hard to imagine that we were in Catania last year when then the week after in northern Italy hell broke loose. So I hope that soon, I had my first vaccination a few days ago, that soon we can all meet in person again. And as you say, I was new to the big science market in 2014 when I joined ESS, but the defense market is very similar, you know, very narrow, niche markets, few suppliers, highly regulated. And then UNICEF the same. I was in vaccines and cold chain for vaccines, very few suppliers, highly regulated. You know, you all have a fridge at home and a freezer, but the demand on vaccine fridges and freezers and cold rooms and so on are of course completely different. So in a way, the thinking was very similar, and well, it was like jumping right in to the action when I came in 2014, because we are under construction. And that, of course, brings in a special challenge now, the situation, because we have to have people here to build everything. So it has been a big challenge, but I can show you a little bit how we handle it. No, I have the same problem that I can't switch. Ah, now it comes. Okay. So I will tell you about the dedicated measures we had as an organization, and also as a supply division. We have procurement, we have logistics. I'm also responsible for the travel management, where you can imagine we had the biggest impact actually. So from the beginning of March 2020, there was a dedicated working group established. We call them the CVO working group, and they are actually part of the weekly EET meetings, the executive ESS executive team, so the directors that meet every week, and there is not a meeting where this is not on the agenda, of course. And then we have a dedicated intranet page where it says how we work during the outbreak, and this is updated every week so that the staff at any time can see, have the recommendations changed, have the rules changed, and so on. So the key measures and recommendations we follow, of course, what our host countries are issuing, and then the WHO. We look at other organizations, how they are doing. So this is being kept up to date. The density of staff at the workplace, of course, we have to keep low. So all the instruction is that all staff members that can perform their tasks from home must work from home. So this is not a choice, this is an instruction. Staff with symptoms must not come to work, of course, and then we have a quarantine, and this is also following the local authorities. And then once you had an infection, then you have to, here it is 2 days that you have to have been completely free from symptoms until, and then you can go to work again. Face masks are mandatory in the office. I'm sitting in a room by myself, so, but just so you know, it's always here, or how to see maybe now with the screen in the background, but we have to have face masks. Business travel, first it was restricted and then later prohibited. The same goes for meetings at the office. There are very few restrictions. If it's absolutely essential for the organization, it will be allowed, but then under special provisions, of course, in all the meeting rooms, you have like crosses on the tables where people are allowed to sit to maintain the required distance and so on. And all the visits to the site are suspended. And of course, the construction work on site progresses with Skanska, but of course, under very special circumstances and following every week the situation. There is free testing also since a few months on site. So everyone who has to come to the site and work here, at some occasions it was mandatory, everyone coming was tested, but now it is also a choice that when you come, you can go and there's a place here where you can get tested. So what did it mean for more concretely for procurement and logistics, where one could think like Corona came and everything went down and crashed? And I can tell you it was not really the case. So my procurement staff is working from home almost fully. And we have 1 to 2 people coming to the office at some day during the week because we get, hard copy letters or there are other things to be signed or distributed, and someone who is on site might need help in person, or we need to look at something that came in. The other day we got huge concrete doors, and then the responsible procurement officer went to be there when they were received and so on. So we are not completely off, but it is very restricted. And we rotate this to allow staff to change the environment. As you know, there is a lot of psychosocial impact of all of this. So when we have this representation on site, we take turns so that everyone can get to the office. Then some people have taken home their office chairs, their big screens and so on to have a proper work environment. And in the office, we have a limited number of desks so that whoever is coming has a proper place to work from. All our processes from low value to high value cases are working from home without any problem. Most of our systems are set up to work electronically. And the electronic signature is not an official system yet, but we make it work. But we are actually on the way to implement one. Logistics, of course, we have a logistics building. My team is on site. We have some external places in Lund. They work with a slightly reduced team, so the back office function is at home. They take turns, and the team on site has special provisions for minimizing exposure with truck drivers and so on, for example, that come. So it works much better than I would have thought a year ago. So my team is doing a great job, and I'm impressed every day by the way they handle this. Supply chain, I have to say it's a rather low impact, and I didn't think so from the beginning. The only country where we had official letters for closing factories was Spain last year. In all other countries, we had some suppliers that have experienced some impact, but really not to the extent that one could have thought. So we have been keeping on with the business almost as normal. We call it business as unusual, but it works really, really well. A lot of communication with suppliers. Of course, if there is impact on the site, we reschedule with suppliers so that it doesn't end up in a situation of delay of the supplier. When we think we can delay deliveries because on site, for example, some installation work is now delayed, then we arrange this with the suppliers. And then last year also, I think after 3 weeks, the factories could open again. And also there, the impact was, minimal. So not really major interruptions in our supply chain. And on the ESS construction side, despite the challenge of bringing in people, the in-kind partner, Skanska, has a lot of international suppliers from everywhere. That was a big challenge, but they were still progressing at around 80% of the normal capacity. And then in my division, this is an overview of the number of cases, the number of requisitions we get in every month. So since 2017-18, which are the lower curves, we have experienced like what we always call the peak that we experienced actually for 2017-18-19, but it has come later. And everyone thought in 2020, the yellow line, okay, then in March, you see it went down. And then we thought, okay, this is the impact of Corona. But then it spiked up again, so that when we were at the end of the year, 2020 was at the same overall peak load as 2019. And 2021, the red line, you see, we are at a very high level again. So and that maybe indicates that both on site and also in terms of supply chain, we haven't seen any slowdown. And this is the number of deliveries that come in. And you see the red line, 2021. I don't know if it's because now people want to go on summer holiday and they have things sent to them. But you see in May, it has broken all records that we ever had. So we have a huge number of deliveries coming in, and you can see the pattern. It follows, of course, the procurements that we make, that the deliveries coming in follow the same pattern. So with this, yes, now I stopped sharing. I would like to conclude my presentation and give you the possibility to ask any questions that you have.
Great, thank you very much. please go ahead and mark if you have questions. Very good data with the graphs there. I was actually wondering, do you think that there was sort of a lump that people had waited to do the procurement until May this year and say, okay, now we cannot wait anymore, or is it just random?
No, I think it's random, and maybe it will go down again. So you see the pattern is almost the same. It's a bit like the business travel that is now almost zero, but you can see that it's low in the beginning, and then March, April, May, it goes up, and then it goes down, and then September, October, November, it's high again. So it's like a normal pattern, but we have seen the recent years that the trend has been going up. Whereas the original estimation on which my staffing is based was actually that after 2019, it would go down so slowly because we are in initial operations and most of the construction is done. But we can see now that this seems to shift by a few years, and it's rather a plateau than a peak. So the problem is I have already reduced my team, and this is a big challenge now. And then, of course, my right hand, Louis, that many of you know, has left a half year ago, and we had a recruitment freeze. So I'm a bit pressed, but so far also because our systems are very efficient and we can work largely electronically now, but it is a big challenge, and we will have to see and evaluate now over time. But yeah, I hope it is not going in the same trajectory upwards, let's say.
Okay, great. We have a question from Toon. Toon, do you want to unmute and ask it? I can read it instead if you like. So Toon is asking. Yeah, oh, here.
Yeah. So I think Mirko. Well, thanks a lot for your overview. I was wondering. So I think you were talking about, let's say, the heavy installation work, but so the scientific work. So the instruments that are now being well prepared all over Europe and on the way to ESS, I guess. Mm-hmm. So can you give some details on this?
Yes, there's a lot of work going on, and as you can see also in the publications we make for tender awards and the ongoing tenders and upcoming, that a lot of that work, which you say they are prepared around Europe. And when I joined ESS 7 years ago, the head of communication, who was the acting head of procurement at that time, said, "Don't worry about NSS and science. It will be all in kind." And that has not been the case at all. I think we are going towards a 50-50 almost. So we are tendering for a lot of caves, so the structures, sort of bunkers around the instruments, the shielding of the beam lines. We now got a case for these robotics to handle samples and so on. So I also thought, like, there will be a slowdown. Maybe we focus a lot on 3 instruments to get to the first science, but I can say that we are actually working on all 15 at the same time, and a lot of these things are coming to me, which is very interesting. This morning Frida wrote also about one case. You know, it's very it's new technology and so on, which is another challenge, of course. But I can say that has not slowed down either. It's also very highly active at the moment.
And to continue on this, I assume that in the end, the teams from the European laboratories will come to Lund to do the real installation, or at least the final installation work. Is that already so urgent now that you see problems here, or that just can wait?
The way I see it, so now what we do is the beam lines and the structures we put up, and these what do they call them? The hutches, which are sort of the control rooms of the instruments. All this goes first, and this is what we do right now. So I think when the actual instrument comes with the sample handling, I think it seems, at least now, to nicely coincide with hopefully the end of the pandemic and the period afterwards. So at the moment, I would say time-wise, the schedule will not be affected by the pandemic.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. And let's see if we have other questions. That doesn't seem to be the case. Thank you very much, Mikko.
Thanks a lot. And as I said, I have to leave for an outdoor event in 30 degrees. So, but if anyone has any questions or so at any time, you know, just contact me or via Anna or someone. They know where they can find me. So, and thanks a lot again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great. And now we move on to CERN, where we have to introduce Anders Undervik, Head of Procurement and Industrial Services. Anders does have a technical background and a lot of experience at CERN, where he joined in 1988. And already then it was in the procurement service, and he's been head of contracts in 1992, and then also working specifically with the Large Hadron Collider project. And then finally in 2018, he was then promoted to head of the Procurement Industrial Services Group. So please, Anders, go ahead and share your slides and take the microphone.
Thank you and good morning. Now I will share my slide here. So is this, you see this now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, perfect. So first of all, similar to what Mikko said, of course, on the CERN side in general, we have more or less implemented the same things what they have at ESS, where there's reported enlarged directorate every week about the situation. There are internet sites for the personnel and everybody who are interested in see what the CERN is doing. We have also been providing help and services to the local authorities. We have produced this kind of alcohol solution to local authorities. We produced masks. We even bought a machine to produce our own masks and so on. So all that is in general, but I will not go into much in detail on that. I will talk a little bit more about what we did in the procurement service and with companies. So to come back on early measures in March, when we started having problem all over Europe with this, we were informing the contractors about what we did at CERN, and we informed them and asked them to inform their staff. We asked them to provide what they had as pandemic response plan within the companies and for their own personnel to be aware of how they handle it. And then on 13th of March, we said that CERN, we moved into what we call the safe mode, basically meaning that only activities essential for the safety and security of the site, material and equipment and personnel would go on. And as of 20th of March, all other people should work remotely insofar as possible. Now, normally at CERN, at that time, we would be around 10, 11, 12,000 people on the CERN site. So 3,000 staff, some 6,000, 7,000 users, what we call physicists, and then you had perhaps 2,000 persons from companies working. So, and that had to leave the CERN site with a very short notice. For us on the procurement service, it about 180 companies working with different contracts on the CERN site, being anything from the guards at the gates, distribution of mail, but also very technical work in the workshops and in the tunnel and so on. Around 2,000 people, 2,500 people. So we basically had 1 week to plan for this before the companies should move out the people which were not necessary. So what we did was we established a risk matrix for each contract and looked into where the risks were, which activities had to stay because they were necessary for the safety and security on the CERN site. For example, the guards at the gates, we need to keep them. We can't just leave the guards at the gates because then nobody could enter the site anymore. Also some activities related to safety, transport of some material, maintenance of some essential equipment, etc., etc. So we did this risk matrix for each contract. We drafted the templates for all correspondence to make sure that the communication to all companies was coherent. We feared that otherwise a lot of people would communicate with contractors in a completely uncoordinated way, and companies would not understand what was going on. So we really needed to keep control on all communication. So we told the technical departments, you don't communicate with companies, we do. And that's what next point, we had the contacts with the technical colleagues, and to ensure that communication passed via us in procurement service. We tracked all correspondence with contractors in case there would be an issue afterwards. We knew what had been said to each contractor. We established a frequently asked question for internal use for the technical colleagues in particular, and also the colleagues in the procurement service, how they should reply when the companies ask them questions. And we had to establish special conditions for temporary workers, because we have a lot of temporary workers and they do not follow exactly the same legal requirements as service contract. So on the 16th and 17th of March, a couple of days after having done that, we contacted the companies, and most of them, where they had to withdraw the personnel, either fully or partially, we declared force majeure. And that was accepted by companies, and the companies which had to withdraw all the personnel, they did so. Some companies withdrew some of the people for activities which were not necessary, and left others. And that was, we continued like that. And we also discussed with the contract manager on the technical side to make sure that everything was handled in a smooth way. So, and then on the 20th of March, basically all activities which were not necessary had stopped. As regards to goods reception and deliverables materials, that continued more or less as usual. Of course, there were a little bit reduced manning in the logistics side and goods reception, but goods deliverables continued basically. If there were some major transport issues, there may have been issues. Also for equipment which required significant acceptance testing or commissioning and so on, there may be some issues. So we delayed some of that because we simply did not have the people on site to do that. But that was decided on a case-by-case basis. Also, some companies, of course, had problem in delivering because they themselves were faced with a reduction in staff or having, and that was discussed with the companies in that case to agree on a delayed deliverables. But most of the deliverables continued, I would say. Then we were in what we call the safe mode. We started planning for the restart of the activities. So we had then 180 contracts. Of course, we couldn't restart everything in one go, so we had to make a list of priority, which were the activities which were most urgent to start with, which could wait. And again, we needed to make sure that communication was coherent with companies. So all that was discussed with the technical people as well, that communication should pass via the procurement service. We had to establish the new health and safety condition together with our health and safety environmental group to define what would be applicable to contractors' personnel. We again had to draft templates for correspondence. Yeah, we discussed with the technical colleagues, as I said. We made presentations to all departments to tell them what we were doing, how we planned to do it, and got their agreement to the approach we took. We continuously updated our frequently asked question website, of course, and then we started communicating with companies, sort of preparing them that they should plan for a restart, and we also informed them that when they restarted the activities on certain site, of course, they had to apply with applicable laws. And companies had to apply with the French and Swiss regulations, which were imposed by the competent authorities, social distancing, personal protective equipment, etc., etc. But the compliance with local laws and applicable laws, that's at the contractor's cost, of course, and responsibility. So, and there we could, and we told them that in case they had problem, for example, with getting protective equipment, because at a certain point of time, it was not so easy to get masks and all these kind of things, we could help them. And we did in some cases. But in principle, it was their responsibilities. So on the 13th of May, we told them that basically as of 15th of May, we considered no more force majeure. So the activities would start up as of that date, basically. Some activities remained closed because they were not necessary or there were problems. The companies could, in some cases, not start up with a very short notice, and we agreed with them at the different delivery schedule and so on. But in most cases, we ended the force majeure on 15th of May. Now, what kind of help did we provide to the contractors? Well, first of all, one should realize that some of the rules regarding quarantine, for example, were more severe at CERN than they were in France and Switzerland in general. So since contractors' personnel are supposed to follow the legislation, basically they would follow the French or the Swiss legislation, which was applicable. But in some cases, we told them, no, we have stricter rules. You have to quarantine if the people come from different countries and so on. In those cases, we accepted to compensate them for contractors' personnel, which could not work on site because they had to be in quarantine for our own rules. Of course, it's our fault. So we accepted to pay them for that. The fact that we had declared force majeure helped the contractors to claim compensation from the authorities for furlough personnel. So they got, in France, I think they got 80% or something like that of the salary of the people which could not work and so on. In some cases, because we had more strict rules, the companies could claim also compensation from the authorities, in particular the Swiss authorities, for loss of income due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So CERN's made a certification for the company so they could claim. So they got compensated for that. So these are things which help the companies cope with it in a quite good way, I think. As a conclusion, we want to take the contractor's situation into account at every step. We kept coherent communication with them. We kept them informed what would go ahead, how we would approach the closing of the activities, but also the startup of the activities. They were informed in advance and could plan for it. And also we communicated with the internal stakeholders, of course, to make sure that the communication provided to the companies were coherent and in a correct way to avoid any kind of disputes afterwards. In the end, only very minor claims were received from contractors for incurred extra cost. There have been some claims, but I would say very minor compared to the total amounts involved. There are no significant delays in the procurement activity. So orders went out, invitation to tenders went out, we awarded contract, we signed orders and contract. There were no delays on that side. There have been delays on the execution of contracts, partly on the service contract because we stopped some activities, of course, but also on deliverables, there have been some delays. So the total expenditure, if I look on it, in 2020, it's been lower than we expected. Some of that has been shifted into 2021. But on the actual work done by the procurement service, there have not been any significant delays, I would say. And that was made possible by having already before the pandemic struck moved all procurement activities online. So we were basically teleworking in the office before the pandemic struck. So moving the procurement officers at home to continue working on the computer rather than work on a computer in the office didn't change very much for us. We didn't have any paper before the pandemic struck. All orders were electronically issued, contracts electronically issued, electronically signed, all call for tenders electronically issued. The bids are uploaded on an electronic safe platform and so on. So all that was handled already before the pandemic struck, fortunately. After the pandemic, we have gone through shall we say, well, evaluated the replies, the consequences, and we've gone through our general contract conditions to see if they need to be modified as a consequence of the pandemic with experience gained through the pandemic. And we have basically concluded that there are no major changes needed. There may be some minor tweaking here and there, but in principle, our general conditions worked perfectly well also during the pandemic. The application of force majeure, for example, and so on. It worked well, I think. And that all this was presented. In fact, we participated in a Czech event by something called the European Institute for Purchasing Management. Together with, they checked with the hundreds of organizations and companies, private companies, of course. And the way we had handled all that from the beginning to the end, and the fact that we were equipped already before to handle all orders and so on electronically, allowed us to get an award for something called the Peter Kraljek Prize for Excellence. And it was in the Master of Business Continuity category, and in particular taking into account the COVID pandemic situation, of course. So there we have the award. It's in my office if somebody wants to pass and see it. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Anders. We do have time. There's a couple of questions in the chat. Please, Frank, do you want to unmute and ask your question to Anders?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Anders. It's very, very clear, and I must say we acknowledge a lot of what you've been presenting also for RISA. Force majeure is indeed just purely an exemption of liability, so it doesn't mean that you take over the responsibility from the contractor, and that's clear. I understand that this is really, of course, you have a big infrastructure and people need to come on site to install the equipment, etc. So for that, this is very clear. But was it also acknowledged for suppliers which had to work from their own premises? And you acknowledge the principle of force majeure systematically, or was it to be done on a case-by-case basis? And were they allowed to get similar compensation as the one you were referring to from their authorities?
It depends. We have two cases. One, if I can say, assume that a very big installation machine or whatever equipment were supposed to be installed on some site and commissioned, and they couldn't do it because we didn't even have the people to do it. Then we would declare force majeure that they had to delay the installation. In some cases, it was just a discussion with them and they were not interested in doing it anyway because they couldn't, so we just changed the delivery schedule. If that was not the case, we would declare force majeure, and they could possibly in their respective countries claim compensation for that, depending on the legislation in the countries concerned. In some cases, it was not a problem for us, but because they perhaps didn't need any big installation or any manpower return, but the companies could not deliver because they were subjected to COVID restrictions. People could not work in the workshop, so they had delays in getting material and components. And it happened indeed that some companies asked or claimed force majeure that they couldn't deliver. And in those cases, we would look at it on a case-by-case basis. force majeure, as you know, meaning that basically the company should be unable to fulfill the requirements for events they have no control over, basically. And if indeed that was the case, we would accept it. In some cases, companies did not really ask for force majeure, but they said, look, we have problem. We can deliver, but it will be a month late. And we looked into the schedule and said, yeah, for us, it's not the big issue because due to the COVID, a lot of things are delayed anyway. So it will not cause a problem for us. And we just agreed a new delivery schedule with them. So we had all different possible scenario, I would say.
Great, thank you very much, Anders. There is a question from Toon, but I want to wait with that question until after the fourth speaker, because I think it's one that could be asked to all of you. Instead, I would like to move on to Frank Germs, who was just speaking. So Frank has been with ESA for 30 years and is currently head of Earth Operation and Telecommunications Procurement Division. But he actually been supporting nearly all the ESA projects with human space, launches, science, R&D, navigation, and then now Earth Observation, telecommunication. So working with contracts there, and since he has a legal background, it's very good to introduce him now and hear what ESA has been doing in this aspect. Please, Frank, go ahead and share your screen and unmute.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nikolai. And, as you say, sometime when we joined a big organization like Anders and myself, we like it, and so we stay for a while. Okay, let me share my screen. You say you can see it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I must say first, everything, both what Belen was explaining about the questionnaire result and what Mikko and Anders said about their own experience as an organization is fully acknowledged. I think we have a lot of commonalities there, and there I will not add much. We can come back at the end to that, but I think we really had exactly the same kind of scenario in terms of internal organization and logistics being very much also linked to national authorities of every country where it has some sites, and we had to respect the rules there. I focus more on really the industrial impact, the perception we got either directly or also from very good studies made by the European Space Policy Institute, which is located in Vienna, which makes some report. I have the URL of them at the end.
Right.
Okay, sorry for that. So first point is the direct impact on the main suppliers in the space sector. So what we had is nothing new. As of course, everybody has experienced the same, but not only in our organization, but in industry, extensive recourse to teleworking. Nobody's surprised by that. I think on the overall year, we got about 50-50. 50% of the people working in teleworking on average. So some companies, they were much more located on their site, and others were fully teleworking. Also, not being surprised that they just led to a significant ramp up of the IT infrastructure. I think it was quite a challenge for the different IT services of both companies and the organization like ESA. There were some clear shutdown of some sites during the lockdown period, and in particular between March, let's say spring last year, for the first lockdown. We had to close Kourou, the launch base in French Guiana, for 2 months, completely closed. Still, in spite of that, the critical deliveries and operations could largely be achieved. So we had JUICE is one of the scientific satellites. They had to do some testing. AIT means assembly, integration, and test. We could be done. We had the launch of Sentinel-6, which is one of the Copernicus mission that we managed to take place. It was done actually from the US in collaboration with NASA. And the launch was on time. It was planned for September, and it took place exactly at the foreseen date years ago. Vega, in a way, we had a launch foreseen in early April, and this one had to be postponed to September. But for COVID reason, but also for combined reason of the other payload that were not completely ready, and another launch of Quantum, which is a telecommunication satellite later at the end of the year. Some projects were more affected. Of course, the Ariane 6 a development project where we have suffered some delay. It was planned to be still launched, let's say with the first maiden flight this year, but it is postponed. Orion, the European Service Module, is a collaboration we do with NASA for the providing a service module of their new vehicle. And this has been, due to COVID, but also other reasons, had to be postponed, as well as ExoMars, which is also a collaboration with Russia, which is now postponed to 2022, also for technical reasons, but the COVID, of course, did not help, especially when you collaborate with other entities which are very much affected by also the COVID situation. Also, the operation of our scientific satellite, which are mainly operated from Darmstadt in Germany, they were, let's say, in an economy mode. And so, of course, the satellites were operated, critical operations went on, but the collection of data and the analysis were more delayed. If we look at the overall situation, we could say that there was a 2 months average delay at all the level of the supply chain. We actually made an audit of how much it affected the productivity of the companies on a major contract of ESA. And there we have an estimate for the 20 biggest project of 115 million, and focusing on manufacturing integration and test. When we look at the slightly broader picture, how much the space industry was affected in their business. So clearly, there was some loss of commercial activities due to, most of the space companies are working also in aeronautic, and aeronautic is also very much affected, of course, by the COVID situation, and for some longer period than just the pandemic one, and this we all know. The main impact that has been suffered by companies is delays and cancellation of some orders from the commercial market, not so much from the public market. I will come back to that. And not too dramatic, because we speak about a few months on projects which are normally for 4 or 5 years duration. The support that the public sector has provided was not granted by the private customer, and being mainly the satellite operators, which themselves, of course, had their own problem. And so this has led to a reduction of 14% of sale reduction. And for some of the prime contractors, even 25 to 30%. On purely the operators' revenues, and we speak mainly about the telecom operators, quite a limited impact. At the end, the services were going on, and we know very well that there was an increased needs of access to commercial operation telecommunication data. So that went reasonably well. Some of them had problems. We had OneWeb that had to go to a very large restructuring, Intelsat, but this is more structural due to the evolution of the telecommunication market. If we look more at the startup, the SMEs, and this is an analysis coming up from the ESPI, there was clearly, during the first lockdown, a complete pause of investment. So they could not really get the money. I think most of the investors, venture capital, preferred to wait how the situation would evolve. But later in the year, there was a good recovery, leading to some reasonable situation at the end of the year. They managed to recover 40% in the last 3 months of the expected investment. The impact was mainly on the demand side, and leading to cash flow problem due to payment delays and loss of revenues, much more than on the operations due to the shutdown or the disruption of the supply chain or loss of productivity. In terms of confidence, there was a deterioration of the business situation and the confidence for the SMEs and the startup. Still a smaller share of 54%, they said that they met their expectation, but compared to the usual figure, which was more in the range of more than 80%, this was relatively lower level. Positive impact recognized by all the SMEs is, of course, less travels because of the need to have access to online events. new opportunities of partnership, which are created by this new way to communicate, to participation to webinars with industrial days organized in a much more accessible manner. And also opportunities for innovation. I'll come back to that on the last slide. These has also created possibilities that COVID-19 require more services, and it could be also enlarged to other field of customers. Very significant positive impact, of course, of this is the dematerialization. We spoke about electronic signature or the full electronic process of procurement, online meetings, and of course, travel reduction. It's not good for aeronautics, but at least in terms of for small companies, it was a very significant cost saving. And there were also adjustment to contracts and special, let's say, financial support that was granted. If we look specifically at the measures that ESA has been putting in place, first, we did not foresee that, but shortly before the COVID, end of 2019, we had a fantastic ministerial space conference where we got even more than what we needed, what we requested. We always need more money, but that's what we requested. We got 15 billion of euro for implementation on the space program. Large part for Copernicus, which is really environment satellite, but also exploration and also launch. So that was really a big portfolio that we had to implement as from 2020. We had, of course, our member states meeting that had to take place, and we managed to organize them online, which was not easy at the start, but at the end it was quite efficient. Full digitalization of the procurement process, and we were very, let's say, digitalized for issuing invitation to tenders, even receiving proposal with our system ESA Star, but we made the last step with the electronic signature. Not using a certified tool, but industry were, so we even had scan signature or using another digital tool that was recognized purely for internal use, but industry was very pleased that we could still be very pragmatic and sign contract electronically like this. We have, like Sen was mentioning, also extending the bidding period for tendering actions, evaluating proposal and awarding the contract in the same way. It was a tremendous effort. And in the same period last year, we had, evaluation board of about 300 people for 6 large Copernicus satellites, the same on exploration. So it was very huge, but it was very efficient. In terms also of efficiency, this is you cannot really read the diagram, but actually in orange, this is the number of procurement we have done in 2020, and which is a 20% increase, reaching more than 1,400 contracts, 20% increase compared to the previous years. Largely due to, I think we have all witnessed this, people taking less holidays and teleworking, leading to more working hours and more productivity on the ESA side. We have, like Sen acknowledged, to qualify COVID-19 as a principle of being a force majeure event. But of course, we have, depends on the type of activities. When people doing purely engineering that could be done in teleworking, we have hardly just accepted a justification. If we look at the financial measures that were taken, we had cash management. We have really been very flexible in allowing partial payment for milestones that were meant to occur last year for sure, and for some of them also early 2021. We have increased the level of advance payment, and we already had a measure of 35% for SMEs. We allowed to increase it to 50%. And we have also accelerated the payment process, which is normally 30 days after receipt of an invoice or achievement of a milestone. And we have managed to reduce it to around 10 days, basically paying as soon as we could. Interestingly, even if we really say that force majeure does not mean that there is a contractual takeover of responsibilities on either side, there's been some discussion about this 150 million I mentioned earlier, whether after this audit, there could be a possible compensation. It's not contractually justified, but facing an industry that is having a lot of difficulties on also the commercial market, even the aeronautic world, So maybe does ESA as a public organization may have the responsibility to, moral one in some way, to support industry even financially with real cash. There was a lot of discussion. The member states are hesitant on that because they have, of course, the RFF and the Recovery Resilience Facility that is put in place finally now by the European Commission, this huge 600 or 700 billion euro. But next to that, would we be ready to pay? So that's still pending. Some delegations are in favor, some others not. We may have a decision in July. Last element, just a bit aside of that, how much we also keep in mind that let's say the space asset we have and the space infrastructure, all the satellites we have played a very interesting role in supporting the national or local authorities with respect to COVID-19 analysis. So it was providing navigation signal, with Galileo or EGNOS, telecommunication information, and also a lot of Earth observation imagery of satellites. This was a very famous, let's say, a very successful project done in partnership with the European Commission that is called RACE, which was really to look at all the different assets that we could have to help all these industries and the national authorities. And this was done with also, we provided also some data to our collaboration, let's say, to NASA or the Japanese Space Agency. Next to this, of course, when we speak about the weather forecast, we think mainly about satellites, but next to this, you have also normally aircraft that are providing some data on winds or so, and also some ground station. But there we had, of course, more demand from the meteorological satellite, being MTG or METOP. But also we had launched a satellite that is taking care of analyzing in a vertical way over 30 kilometers the wind. And this was very useful data to be provided during the pandemic. We issued dedicated call for proposal linked to COVID, so inviting industry, every side and not necessarily working for space, to propose something how we could use satellite data for educational or healthcare purposes. We had two national initiatives, one for Italy and one for UK, but also we enlarged that to all ESA member states, and this call is now closed, but there was a lot of proposals submitted and small contract placed. Finally, a bit like Anders was mentioning for CERN, we have used our own specific infrastructure technology, being 3D printing, telemedicine devices that we have also, for instance, for the Astronaut Center, to, let's say, to help even manufacturing masks or fans, etc. Also in collaboration with National Space Agency. So that's all I wanted to say. If you want to know more, we also have very interesting information on this site from the European Space Policy Institute in Vienna. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Frank. And good with the link to the site. If you're able, could you put the link in the chat function? That would be great.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
Regarding questions, I think I will have the final of the fourth speaker in the session. We'll go on now, and then after Leonardo has given his presentation, we will probably have time for just taking a few questions. So, yes, now I missed my presentation slide, but I think that's quite okay. Leonardo, you're also a well-known face in this world. And Leonardo Bianoli is the Deputy Chief Financial Officer for what I said was Fusion for Energy, which is the European domestic agency for the ITER project. And he's working very closely with or managing the EU ITER supply chain industrial policies, but also joined Fusion for Energy with experience from the aeronautical and defense and space sectors. So please, Leonardo, go ahead.
Thank you, Nikolai. Good morning to all of you. First of all, I want to apologize. You see me as a very dark silhouette on the screen. It's because I have a window behind me, and the webcam finds it difficult to properly expose the image. So as Nikolai mentioned, I'm going to introduce a little bit what happened with the European ITER supply chain during the COVID, well, mostly during 2020, beginning of 2021, so the peak COVID period. There's still, of course, things happening as of today. And unfortunately, there will still be things happening for some time in the future. But I think now it's a bit better understood how the whole series of events developed. I will not repeat what my colleagues already said. In general, things went much better than we expected or we feared at the beginning of the COVID crisis, so in March and April 2020. In the end, we were able to adapt well to the new way of working. We'll have a few examples, and also our supply chain showed a lot of showed really very good performance, a lot of resilience, and the ability to deliver even in the COVID context. I assume you can see my screen. Can you confirm?
Yes, it looks good.
Perfect. So just moving on. We started monitoring the situation in February, I would say February 2020, and then as we operate in Southern Europe, for us really early March, the situation quickly deteriorated. So we were hit a bit by surprise, I have to say, in March. But we were able to react quickly, and already starting in April 2020, we were able to put in place a number of actions, direct actions, which were immediately addressing the challenges, both internal challenges, because also for PERIIA and for the ITER project overall, it was not easy to make the transition, but in particular for our suppliers. So clearly, as was already mentioned by Frank and by the previous colleagues, one of the earliest issues we had to deal with, or we tried to deal with, was how to make cash available as quickly as possible to our suppliers. We did more or less the same as Frank presented a few minutes ago. We tried to reduced, in fact, the time to pay. From our usual 45 days, we targeted to reduce to 30 days. This was done automatically for all the contracts. Whenever contractors requested, we suspended the recovery of the pre-financing. So we stopped recovering the advance payments on the invoices. This is still ongoing. It occurs for the majority of the cases. There are some cases in which this is not possible, but for the majority of the cases it occurred. And also, whenever appropriate, we renegotiated the payment schedules, introducing additional intermediate payments, so to make sure that suppliers could invoice with a higher frequency, therefore getting cash as quickly as possible. In parallel, as everybody else, in fact, we moved, or we had already started this transition, but we accelerated our transition to a paperless environment. We were quite lucky in terms of e-submission and in general electronic interaction with the suppliers, because we had already deployed a complete e-submission platform in 2019. So this was very timely. And we have been processing all contract changes and all exchanges with contractors electronically through a tailored system already since 2017. So these aspects were already covered. What we did was then to move to electronic signature for all contracts, which occurred either through the same tool, the same electronic tool which we use for contract changes, and in some cases we just relied on commercial qualified electronic signature tools. Additionally, we had a few more exotic actions in order to maintain the connection to our supply chain, even in the impossibility or given the difficulty with physically moving people around. And we did some interesting experience with having inspection of manufacturing site of manufacturing components using virtual reality goggles or using remote metrology equipment. And in certain factories where we had manufacturing processes ongoing requiring our overview for quality assurance reasons, we set up our own remote process monitoring tools at the supplier's premises. Overall, I think we moved to the complete or almost complete virtualization of how we worked and how we interacted with the supply chain. In fact, during 2020, the on-site presence here in the Barcelona office and in the Munich Gatking office, the office presence was down to 2 or 3% of the normal, and we didn't experience major issues. We were able to continue working quite well. In Cadarache, on the ITER work site, the situation was, of course, a bit different. The work site never closed, so activities continued. But during the late spring and early summer 2020, staff and contractor numbers were down to 10% of the normal. But in spite of this, in particular on the work site, we were able to achieve in June 2020 a major construction milestone, which showed that things were working quite well. We delivered the main tokamak building to the ITER organization, so that was quite a success. On top of these, let's say, spot actions to ensure business continuity, we looked at the situation of our supply chain in a more structural way, and we tried to help or to support our supply chain at different levels. We defined in April 2020 3 levels of impact or of intervention, if you wish, on which to provide support to our suppliers. Level 1 was in relation to the additional, I mean, all of this is still valid, we're still doing this, but started more than 1 year ago. So in relation to the additional costs incurred by our contractors because of the changing, for instance, health and safety measures. And I will spend a few words in this. We have in our model contract a provision according to which the additional costs which are incurred due to a change in the legislation is a cost for which contractors shall be reimbursed. So this, in fact, what we call the change in law provision, this is something which we consider is already part of our existing contractual obligations. Then the only issue is how we implement this obligation and how we measure these additional costs. The level 2 of intervention is about the additional support which we may provide to safeguard the project, the ITER project schedule. So to those, to secure those milestones which are scheduled critical. Clearly, COVID slowed down many of the activities, and therefore what we considered, and in certain cases are still considering, are incentive schemes or acceleration schemes to recover any delay introduced by COVID. And the third level is the additional support which in general we may provide to reinforce contractors' financial standing mostly and their supply chain, also for the non-scheduled critical items. The interaction with our member states, similarly to what Frank was mentioning, in fact, was that, okay, level 1, of course, being a contractual obligation and being also to a certain extent within our mandate was a no-brainer. For level 2, there were discussions about what we should or should not do. And in the end, not much happened. And for level 3, we were just asked to monitor the situation and then to escalate to the member states issues which could be identified and which would then be addressed by the member states themselves. We had discussions about force majeure, but force majeure for a number of reasons was not invoked by FRE and was not invoked by the suppliers, with a couple of exceptions. So according to our analysis, we conclude that COVID-19 per se would not constitute a force majeure situation, and that in the end, say for our within our model contracts, we have two types of model contracts. Those we use for construction contracts, which are adapted FIDIC contracts, and all the others which are bespoke contracts. So that for all of our contracts, this did not really help much in the situation. As I said, we did not invoke, so we remained, let's say, we asked contractors to continue working on their deliveries. And contractors, in the end, did, with one exception, did not invoke, because, as you will see in the next slide, they had a more interesting way to interact with us in the COVID months. And this more interesting way is, in fact, to use this change in law provision in the contract, which states that a change in the legislative framework is to be compensated. And what we understood and how we interpreted the national measures taken in relation to COVID, we understood and interpreted this to be changes legislation, and therefore triggering compensation for the contractors. You have in this table some of the details, of course, of which type of cost we accepted under the change in law provision. Our FIDIC contract model is a bit, let's say, more generous in terms of what is accepted, but the bottom line is that we accept all additional actual costs which are linked to these changes. Here you have an example of which type of cost we considered in our interaction with the contractors. For some of these costs, of course, we very soon realized that member states themselves were intervening, and therefore we put in place methods to make sure we were not recognizing costs which would then be reimbursed by member states too. These are some of the support measures put in place in France, Italy, and Spain. These three countries are particularly important for us in the ITER supply chain. There were some extraordinary measures, or in other cases, there was an extension of measures which were already available. And for instance, I mentioned earlier the Tokamak main building construction contract, and we for that contract, the assessment of the impact linked to the change in legislation eventually led us to consider 6 types of additional costs. So direct expenditure for safety measures, for instance, for the personal protection equipment, or other, the sanitization costs and so forth. The extra cost related to the fact that there was a slowdown of the work, therefore, say some people could not be deployed on site. Part of this extra cost, in fact, was covered by the national support measures. We considered also the loss of productivity for future works. Here we had some very nice, very interesting interactions with the contractors, because we, to understand, for instance, how much was this loss of productivity, we measured the time people took to move from one building to the other on site, as they had to go through, let's say, predetermined paths that they could not freely move around. How much was this loss of time? And this resulted, it was 16.25% of the working time, which was lost due to these things. And then some, say, minor costs related to the above. I would say the first three items were the main items. Now, looking at how this translated in terms of additional costs. So our estimate in April, almost immediately after the crisis hit us, was that we would have a total increase of our costs of 83 million, of which 65 million euros linked to the, let's say, the level 1, or what is called scenario 1, but it's a level 1 in the first slide, so the additional costs incurred, and around 18 million euros in order to secure the schedule. Then, as I said, this was, as I mentioned at the beginning, we were concerned that there could be a much stronger impact. In the end, the outcome was not as bad as foreseen. I have to say that our contractors were really very good at keeping the dates and keeping the schedule. Therefore, progressively, you can see that the estimation of the additional cost for delay mitigation decreased, and in the latest figures, which we produced just a few weeks ago, are now down to 0. And in a similar way, also the estimation of the direct costs decreased. So we started thinking that we would have 65 million direct costs, and then this moved down to let's say 47 million in the latest estimate. Some of these additional costs we have already settled. So I would say around 60% of this is already settled and already paid to contractors. And for the remaining 40%, we are still discussing and interacting. An additional aspect which we monitored, in particular in relation to the level 3 type of intervention above, so the solidity of our supply chain, is the risk of default. We monitored, and we are monitoring continuously, is the risk of default of our suppliers. Here we have, oops, there is a strange animation. Okay. We have a model to quantify the risk of contractor default for our supply chain based on Moody's data of default probability. And when we translate, I mean, when we look at what this means in our supply chain, this translates to a quantification of an average contractor default risk in a normal year, which is around 2 million euros. In fact, what this means is that in our annual budget, we have a provision of 2 million, which is there to cover this type of risk. It's related to the unsecured amounts, which could be lost, effectively lost in case of contractor default. Looking at, taking as an example, the financial crisis from 2008, we say measured, we estimated the additional probability of default during the 2020, 21, and 22 years for our supply chain. And of course, the probability of default increases, which led us to quantify, the additional COVID risk linked to the contractor default as at around 5.6 million for the 3 years between, 4 years between 2020 and 2023. We have budgeted this and set this aside as a reserve to cover these risks until 2023, and of course, we have already used some of these provisions because we had a couple of issues, not many. As I said, things developed more positively than expected. But then at the end of 2023, we will release this additional reserve to the general budget. So this concludes my presentation. I understand now Nikolai will release, move to the questions.
Thank you very much. In fact, we are running a bit late now, so we don't have time for so many questions. I've noted 3 questions in the chat. I want to refer one of them, which is a general discussion about what is a big science facility. If we could move that to our LinkedIn position, I think it would be an interesting point to put there and people can give their responses. Then there's a second, more very practical question from Sonia to Frank and Leonardo about how you went to paperless procurement signatures. I propose Frank and Leonardo, they can sketch it in the chat for Sonia or establish a contact afterwards. But the original question that I didn't take was actually from Tone. I don't know if you still remember your question, Tone, otherwise I can read it from the chat.
Yeah, please read it. Yeah.
Yep. So the question Tone had for Anders is general for all of you. And I think the question is, now you're very focused on what you did to handle this risk towards the companies. But in fact, one challenge may have been that companies may have gone bankrupt from other causes than your contract. And the question is, how do you relate to that? So I know, Leonardo, you showed some figures on the risk. I thought that was very good, actually. But to all of you, how did you take this risk into consideration? And maybe since the question was posed to Anders first, I'll let you.
Yes, to some extent we did. I mean, depends. If a contractor is easily replaced, it's one thing, but if it's a contractor which you cannot easily replace, it's a completely different thing. And there we did, in a similar way to what Frank and Leonardo mentioned, we facilitated the payment conditions. We changed negotiated payment conditions to make sure that they would not go under because of a cash flow issue and so on. There's not very much else we could do, in fact. So, but that was on an ad hoc basis, case by case.
Okay. Just one of so I guess Mikko left, so probably Frank. Did you have considerations into this?
On which
whether if the companies that were engaged with ESA, if they would go bankrupt from other things and thus causing delays to your projects.
Yeah, I mean, that's a common problem we have, not so much more, let's say, this year than before. And there is always a risk of so contractually this is not something that we are responsible for, but if there is really a very proactive approach from the prime contractor to palliate this kind of deficiency. First, we have an alert system, and we have our auditors going to see the companies. We need to have real insight into the financial situation. And of course, this is by construction confidential. So we try to mitigate the risk, but we do not have a very systematic policy approach for that.
As and you're saying it's also, it's not, but, yeah. And it's not particular to COVID-19, it's just your general ways of operating. Great. Okay. I want to move also to the more interactive part with a survey. So please, Anna, go ahead. And I think we should continue your session at least until 12 o'clock. And then some people may have to leave, but we will continue 5-10 minutes afterwards to all the conclusions here. But please go ahead, Anna.
Thank you so much. Now you see my screen, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and I hope you didn't fall asleep yet. Thank you so much, Mirko, Anders, Frank, and Leonardo for your presentations. I'm really impressed how you really have adapted to the new situation and all the creativity with manufacturing inspection with VR, for Fusion for Energy, and Anders even got the reward for Master of Business Continuity. I'm really, really impressed. And also thank you to our ILOs answering the survey. And what we would like to focus on now is, so what's next? How can we restart? How can we actually help the industry in the big science market to become even stronger? So what we have done now is that we have taken all the comments and proposals that you have written in the survey that Anna Belen were presenting this morning, and we have condensed it into 13 common proposals that we conclude from your comments. So I'd just like to go through them, and then we're going to work with them in the Mentimeter. So the common proposals, we have divided them into 3 groups, so to say. And first group is market. And the proposals that you have proposed is 1, develop a common business market of big science in Europe. Yes. 2, identify activities to maximize SMEs access into the big science market. 3, increase the universal visibility of the otherwise rather fragmented big science market. 4, create a forum for sharing success stories and exchange of experience among national ILOs working with different big science organizations. The next group is funding. Number 5, define specific requirements of the next generation's EU and other European funds in order to support big science industry throughout national, international emergencies. Number 6, develop financial support mechanisms to support companies involved in big science in Europe. 7, financial support for employment retention. 8, subsidize the investment necessary to prepare larger and/or complex procurement activities for industry in big science. The third group that we have identified that you put in the survey was procurement. 9, make available a universal and free software package to enable online matchmaking events for business. 10, simplified procurement processes for low-value orders. 11, encourage harmonization of big science organizations, purchasing practices, processes, and procurement rules. Number 12, encourage harmonization of big science organizations' tender codes through the establishment of a code committee. And then number 13, that's not really belong to procurement, but technology transfer. Develop a set of cross-sector metrics for technology transfer. So these are the 13 ones, and I would like you now to go to Mentimeter, because now we're going to validate these 13 remarks that you actually created. And if you were not in the survey and you would like to add some other remarks, please do that in the chat now, and we'll take that in consideration when we write our writing about the common proposals from the ILOs throughout Europe. So now I would like you to go to Mentimeter, and you have the code and you have the website here. I will also put in the chat a link that you can click on and you will come there immediately, wherever my chat went. Hang on.
I just put it there, Anna.
You did, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. So in the chat now you can see the code and the homepage, right? The mentim.com. So are you there? And what we're going to do now, you are going to actually value from 1 to 10 the impact of the proposal and the ease of implementation. So a higher number, then it's easier to implement, okay? Higher number, easier to implement. And a higher number on impact, it's going to make a bigger impact. So please, you have 13 remarks now. Please start to validate. We are 40 participants. So I give you now 5 minutes to go through these 13 remarks. And if you have any other comments around it, please put them in the chat. Okay, good job. Maybe there's some person left, but if we look upon this, we can see that of course it will be a great impact if we develop the business market of big science in Europe. But we can also see that encourage harmonization of big science organization tender codes throughout the establishment of a code committee is of high impact. And also number 6, develop financial support mechanisms to support companies involved in big science in Europe. The easiest ease of implementation is number 9, and also rather high impact. It's make available a universal free software package to enable online matchmaking events for business. And also simplify procurement process for low value orders. And number 4, create a forum for sharing success stories and exchange of experience among national ILOs working with different big science organizations. Thank you so much for that. So now you have kind of worked with these, and now we're going to, with the same statements, get a new task from me. And that is, you are given 100 points, and you're going to rank them. If you think one statement or proposal is the most important, then you give that proposal 100 points. If you think 2 proposals are the most important, then you give them 50 points each. 3 proposals, then you divide your 100 points according to your valuation. So you have 100 points, and you're going to give them to these 13 statements. And obviously, you're not going to give points to all statements. But please put split out your points, or put 100 points on the statement you think is the most important. Now, please. Maybe someone more. And here we can see that top then is develop a common business market of big science in Europe. Number 2 is identify activities to maximize SME success into the big science market. And develop financial support mechanisms to support companies involved in the big science in Europe. That is the top 3 statements. Are there anyone that's going to submit? Please do it now. Otherwise, I will give the word to you, Torn, for the conclusions and final remarks.
Well, thank you, Anna, for giving me the floor. For me, the difficult task to try to come to conclusions from the input that is still coming in. What is clear so far is that on top with the blue line is develop a common business market, big science in Europe. So that was number 1 in the original list of common proposals. I would guess it is clear that this will be high on the list of what we all would like to see happening in the coming periods. Maybe as a side remark, I think the idea is that from the conclusions that we will try to draw now, we will make a ranking of all the proposals. As you see here, we will we'll try to make a decent list of this. What will we do then? We will send to all of you, to all the participants, the outcome of this webinar, and that is this ranking. But there's more. There was more input to because of this questionnaire. That is not all presented today. This will be in a written document that will be sent to you as well in the coming days. We will ask you to give comments to both the ranking, both to the webinar and to this written document. That will be sent around soon in a few days. Then we will ask you to react to that. I think we would like to see that before the summer break, so that we will have, as PERIIA, a bit of time during the summer break to come up with a full overview of what is what was seen during this this activity, and then around the end of the summer break, we will be ready to have a complete document. A complete document, so with maybe the main outcome, the priority, the ranking of the proposals that you see here. So to come back to this ranking now, it seems to be quiet now. So I guess all of you have given your input. So still, this number one is on top. Develop common business markets of big sciences in Europe. I would myself say that the activities of ENRIITC and PERIIA, and not to forget the Big Science Business Forum to be held next year in Granada. That is, well, exactly what is at least supporting this this proposal. It's Anna, do you think that I can ask the public that is still online to comment on this? Or if you would like to have some additional comments on this first proposal, or you have another opinion on this, please, well, raise your hand.
Maybe people are hungry too.
Yeah, okay, so
I think they worked really hard with the prioritization and
yeah, okay, but maybe it's clear enough what is the prioritization. So okay, good. Let me then maybe just finalize with trying to list the first 5 proposals. If I got the order right, so the second one was also number 2 of the proposed proposals. So that is identify activities to maximize SMEs access into the big science market. So I think from all the comments we were understanding from the questionnaire that indeed the attention to SME work was quite important, and so that is reflected now in this high priority of this proposal on the second place. Then, if I'm correct, the third one in the list was the number 10 on the procurement header. So that is simplified procurement process for low order values, for low value orders. So that's again especially beneficial for SMEs to have easier access to low value orders. So that's, I think that was number 3, and then number 4 was number 4 on the list of common proposals. Create a forum for sharing success stories and exchange of experiences among national ILOs working with different BSOs. I would guess this is where maybe also PERIIA could have an influence. So that's at least an activity on us, ILOs, clearly to start some action. And then I think number 5, but I'm not sure. My order is maybe not exactly the one, but my 5 was develop financial support mechanisms to support companies involved in big sciences in Europe. And here maybe I would have a question mark. So what can be done? What kind of financial support would there be available to start some action, some activity in here? So if there's any influence from the audience now, maybe Anna, can I ask just around to see whether we can have some input here?
There was another input, quite interesting. regarding sort of side markets to the big science market. I guess if you want to formulate the question for debate, Les Cerveaux, I'm sorry, I don't have the first name. Arno?
Yes, thank you. Well, in fact, you know, many technologies that were developed for big science, in fact, were also used to address other markets. And in fact, those other markets could be very big markets also. And I think that we don't have to focus only on big science markets, but also to side markets. In French, we say dual market. I don't know if it's the right word for English, but we could say side market. You understand what I mean? And I think we have to study that because there is huge impact for me from big science technology used in other markets, for example, healthcare, things like that. So I think we should also look at that and not be only around big science market, because for me, big science is also a big source of technology for other markets.
Well, that's very true. I'm very happy with this comment. This one is a bit reflected in our proposal, the last one, number 13, talking about technology transfer. So that is that's very good that you mentioned this. So we think that technology transfer is a very important aspect of the work that we are talking about now. So yeah, great. Thanks for this contribution.
Just to precise, excuse me, but I think that technology transfer is just too limited in view, because we could build full new industrial sector from technology. So it's not only question of technology transfer, even if, yes, you're right, there is technology transfer at the basis of this kind of side market, but it's not only that.
Can I comment, Ton? I totally Les Cerveaux. And I think we will have an event in February focusing on consortia building. And of course, we will have a number of SMEs included and a number of big science facilities, but also larger system integrators. And I think that when we are collecting this number of high technology profile companies, I definitely think they should not only collaborate and form consortia around the big science market, but also oil and gas, space, petrochemical, pharmaceutical, and so forth. So I think your comment is very, very important and relevant. Thanks.
Thank you. I would like to elaborate on that with you, so I will send you a mail to exchange with you on that.
Thanks. And the date is set to 8th of February, so book it in your calendar. But there will become more events from the results here, because I mean, of course, it's nice with the PowerPoint and it's nice with the ranking, but the results we can create is when we start to work with it. And it's a long process that we have to work together, all the ILOs in this forum here and all the different countries and around the facilities.
We could ask ILOs to list for their companies what has been done like that. I'm doing the job today for French company, and for example, there is a very big French company which is using a technology coming from space to hydrogen industry. Yeah. And I have a list, and I think we should all do that because side market is very, very important, I think.
And it's also important for the competitiveness of Europe, and that will also, when we can show that the competitiveness of Europe is increasing, we can also, yes. I would say, ask for the investments of the big science facilities, because we are creating yes. something bigger than just a big science market. I totally agree with you. Very good comment.
Great. So, Toon, do you have any final words, or Paolo maybe?
Let me first do my final words and then give the floor to Paolo. So, well, thanks all of you. What we will do is make a list of the proposals. So the 5 on top, I already mentioned again to you. For me, maybe the most interesting outcome of this was that in general, companies did pretty well in surviving COVID so far. Another interesting outcome is the last remark on this site market. I think, yeah, we are happy to see this mail coming in, and for sure we will make a phrasing where we will refer to this and include it in our list of common proposals. That is for me at the end of my contribution. Thanks a lot to all of you.
Thank you.
I would like just to add something, if possible. Thank you. Now, I would like just to thank on behalf of PERIIA Network, thanks to everybody that participated to this our webinar, from representative of Big Science Organization, particularly all ILOs that are involved, and all other kind of guests. Our proposal was just not to have an analysis, to have a status of the measures adopted, but to have some common proposals from ILO's world. That was our main objective. I think that we found it, and that we have to elaborate all this kind of all the different proposals coming from the questionnaire, from the Mentimeter, and our discussion. But in the next weeks, we can say, we produce a document that with some of these proposals, and we distribute to everybody. And our intention then is it could be some common proposal from ILOs to be addressed to BSOs and to different kind of international stakeholders. I think that it could be really interesting, really important to relaunch economy in big science market and to build up and to structure a big science market as we say. And but I would like just to thank all of you, because I think that is just the start of a work that we have to proceed together in order to achieve this important objective for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I will conclude the session. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
See you soon. See you on Monday.